an English featured speaker series. I'm Steve McKay with Pearson's Higher Education English Marketing Team. I'm glad you could join us today, and I hope you'll find these ideas presented by our speakers valuable for your teaching. For those of you who are new to the webinar format, I have a few quick reminders before the session begins. If you are calling in by phone, please know that this is not a toll-free number. For that reason, we recommend that you select Use Mic and Speakers so you can listen toll-free through your computer speakers. You may notice that your line has been muted. This is to minimize ambient noise as well as interruptions for our speakers. We encourage you to ask questions using the box marked Questions on the right-hand side of your screen in the control panel. You can ask questions at any point during the presentation, and when the formal presentation is over, we will use the remaining time to pose as many of your questions as possible to our speakers. Any questions we don't get to, we will go ahead and forward your email address to the speakers directly so that all questions will be answered one way or another. Please include your name and the school or institution that you are affiliated with at the beginning of your questions. If you want to keep up with the conversation on Twitter, follow us at Pearson North AM and use hashtag PearsonLearn. Okay, so let's get started. Today's session is Student Voices, Listen, Learn, and Respond to Student Needs, presented by Martha Casazza and Sharon Silverman. Student Voices will be a webinar that highlights the outcomes with interviews conducted with both graduate and undergraduate students who experience significant stressors and barriers while completing their higher education experiences. The interviews included students from across the United States in different learning environments. In addition, interviews with students from South Africa and Canada provide the opportunity for cross-cultural learning, cross-cultural view of learning challenges and ways to resolve them. Dr. Martha E. Casazza is a founding partner in the consulting firm of TRPP Associates. Prior to that, she was the Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Adler School of Professional Psychology and the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at National Louis University. She has served as President of the National College Learning Center Association, President of the National Association of Developmental Education, and the co-editor of the Learning Assistance Review. She was President of the Illinois Network of Women in Higher Education, an affiliate of ACE, and is the regular peer reviewer for the Higher Learning Commission. Sharon Silverman is a partner in TRPP Associates and an independent scholar and consultant with degrees in learning disabilities and educational psychology. She works in the areas of faculty staff development, student retention, teaching and learning excellence, student development, program evaluation, distance learning, and collaboration between academic and student affairs. She is the founder and former director of the Learning Assistance Center at Loyola University Chicago, where she developed LEAP, an award-winning student access and retention program, and a learning center at the Stritch School of Medicine. Okay, Martha and Sharon, are you ready to get started?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Steve.
Great. We're going to go ahead and switch the screen over to you.
All right, you're here. Okay, can everyone see? I hope so. Good.
If you just want to enlarge the screen.
You're going to, or we're going to? I think we are. Uh-oh. That will be the slideshow. Yeah, here we go. Okay, we're ready to start. We're assuming that everybody can see the slideshow right now, see our PowerPoint presentation. If you're having any problems, please let us know. Steve will be monitoring your comments on the chat screen. But this is Martha. Sharon's sitting next to me, and we're delighted to be here today to share what we have found to be a very informative, exciting project as we talk to students. So as Steve said, we're talking about student voices, listening, learning, and responding to their needs. Sharon and I...
Can you make the slide bigger and take out the other slides? on the side.
Everyone's seeing the slide, so we have to see how we can make sure that happens. I don't know. Here? Try that. Nope. That's not it. Sorry, we're just trying to make the screen bigger.
Yeah, I thought that was going to happen from the other end.
Okay, how's that?
There we go.
Good.
So again, Martha and Sharon here. We both share a passion for maximizing learning environments where, and now it looks like Steve is the presenter again.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, so that's good.
We can't see your slides.
Maybe, how's that?
There you go, and just enlarge it so it takes up the whole screen.
Is that okay?
It is from our perspective. We can see the whole thing.
Okay.
Onward.
Thanks, everybody, for your patience. Let me start again. Martha and Sharon here. We're sitting in Chicago on a beautiful sunny day. I'm not sure where you all are, but I hope it's sunny where you are. And as I said a few minutes ago, Sharon and I both share a passion for maximizing learning environments where meaningful access is available for all students. The current national educational agenda, as you're all very well aware, focuses on completion and persistence, with the president setting a goal of having the highest rate of college grads in the world by 2020. To work toward this goal, assessment tools have proliferated, and we have considerable quantitative data on the number of students who don't persist. We blame their preparation, we blame current programs, and we talk to each other about change, but what's missing here? We forget to talk to the students. It's easy to say, well, we can't find them, they're gone. Or we know what's best. Or we read the journals, we read the Chronicle, we know what best practice is. But Sharon and I decided to focus the project on listening to those students who have faced serious challenges and have succeeded. Why? Because they have so much to share and they really want to tell their stories. They want to reach back and help pull others along. Their students can motivate other students with challenges, and they can inform our practice. Today's objectives, we're going to be listening and learning from students around the world. I think Steve mentioned that we have students from the United States, from Canada, and South Africa, who you'll be hearing, not their voices, but you'll be hearing their stories and quotes from us. And every time we listen to them, we become more energized from what they have to say. We'll recognize their challenges and how they overcame them. We'll identify common themes and examine a meaningful theoretical framework to help organize these themes and help us as we then develop principles for practice. And we want you to feel free to comment in the chat space if you have a question or comment as we go. And as Steve said, we'll be monitoring those and we'll get to your comments as quickly as we possibly can. So why listen? Why stand back and listen to what our students have to say? Well, it's one thing to keep informed about common challenges faced by our students, but it's another to hear them directly from the students themselves. Their voices are authentic, with little filter, and with much self-reflection. They're earnest, and they volunteered for this project because they want to reach back and help others who are facing similar barriers to see that their goals are also achievable. So not only can these voices inform our practice, but they can also motivate students still working their way through. Whenever these stories have been shared with students, and many of our colleagues have shared them with their students, they tell us how much they can relate to them. As we all know, students will listen to other students more than they might listen to us sometimes, and these stories have been very effective student on student. Now Sharon will introduce our first student, Charles.
Yeah, Charles is a very interesting student, as they all are. You'll see some of the quotes from the interview on the slide. Let me give you some background. Charles was a very good student throughout his education until reaching college. He did very well in elementary and high school. He always got good grades, and he felt pretty good about himself. In fact, he felt so good about himself, especially because he received a full academic scholarship to university. In his own words, he said, in middle school, people said it would be difficult in high school. And then I got to high school, and that was easy. So people said it would be difficult in college. I thought to myself, well, it hasn't been hard yet, so why would it be hard now? Well, he entered with this very positive outlook and proceeded to have a first year that was a total disaster. He began missing classes, I imagine thinking that he didn't need to go to class because it wasn't going to be hard. And then his academic situation continued in what we might call a downward spiral. So he wasn't doing well, and then what happens is, it happens to all of us, life interrupts him some more as his father became ill with cancer. He was very close with his father and found that he was traveling home a great deal to be with him. And then continuing to miss classes and doing poorly, he ultimately was put on academic probation. Now, as you recall, he had this very high opinion of his ability to do well. So when this happened and he was on academic probation, he kept his failure a secret. In his own words, he was really too ashamed to admit it. His personal situation with his family continued to be difficult. His father ultimately died. He totally stopped going to class completely, and he flunked out after his first year. Even though he had flunked out, he continued to live in the residence hall until he was discovered by the administration, and then he was kicked off campus. So from starting with a very positive outlook, he ended up in very dire straits. And he was stranded with nothing to do and nowhere to make money, so he got a coaching job at a local school, local middle school, and began tutoring math to make ends meet. And lo and behold, as he was tutoring these middle school students in math, the students went from C's to A's. They were doing very well. And while he was doing this, one of the students' fathers noticed what was happening and pulled Charles aside and said, okay, Charles, what happened? Because you're too smart not to be going to college. And at that point, Charles just left out the whole story of what happened to this student's father, who took a very special interest in him, got him reconnected with the university through a contact with someone the father knew by the name of this person that the father knew at the university, Dr. Sandra McGuire. Some of you may know of her. She's a well-known fellow in an organization called CLADEA. And in Charles's words, in relation to Dr. McGuire, he said, she really made me believe that I was at a different place in my life and that I would be fine. The important thing besides tips that she gave me was confidence. She reminded me of the things that I had accomplished. So he got a boost from her, took a full course load upon re-enrollment now, and earned a 4.0, a great difference from his first try. So where is Charles now? Well, he finished his college degree. He's now teaching mathematics full-time in high school. And when he reflects upon what happened to him, he says this: that time I was out of school helps me to be able to relate to students because I can walk in and say, hey, I had an $80,000 scholarship and I lost it, but I still overcame that. And I can relate to kids that are doing well and are used to making A's because I've been that guy. And I can relate to kids that are struggling in studies because I've been that guy too. In all of our interviews, we ask the interviewees to give some advice to students and educators. And his advice to students is to go to professors early in the term and get to know them, sit in front of the class and go to class every day. And when he talks about educators and what his experience has been, in particular with Dr. McGuire, he said, she was so passionate and entertaining, but you could tell she really loved what she was doing, and I really learned from her. She's actually my model for being a teacher because she covered everything. She was friendly. And if you didn't care, she didn't put up with any stuff. And if you showed you didn't care, then you're on your own. But if you showed you cared, she would go to the ends of the earth for you. She was the best professor I ever had. So, it's a lot to hear from Charles, and we have a few more, but let's kind of look at his challenges, just as a summary. His personal family issues with his ill father really took him for a loop. He lost all of that huge scholarship that he had. He had unrealistic expectations for the work of college based on the easy time he had prior. He lost his self-confidence but ultimately regained it. He was ashamed and didn't share his story, so he had no support network and certainly no toolbox of strategies to help him succeed. Okay, so now next we're going to Martha, who's going to tell us about CONNIE.
How many of you have had adult learners in your classes? I'm sure many of you have. If you do, you know that Connie's story is not unique. Connie is 45 years old, lives in a rural community in Canada, and gave up an excellent job to return to school full-time following a death in her family that triggered in her that she needed to fulfill her dream of completing college. She has a family and all the responsibilities that come with that, and she travels several hours to get to school. In fact, she was traveling over 2 hours a day, 5 days a week to get to the university. She left a full-time job where she'd been very successful, and she had an extensive network of colleagues. She was afraid, as you know, at first, being an older student. Her closest peers age-wise were her professors, and she had little in common with her younger classmates. She pulled back from a full load because she panicked and didn't think she'd be able to remember all the material at her age. She took a course that taught study skills, and she eventually became a mentor to her younger peers who were lacking in confidence in areas where she felt strong based on her work experience. One thing she recommended for professors is to not underestimate the intelligence or the life experiences of their students. I'm sure that story sounds familiar to many here. What were Connie's challenges? Well, first of all, she was an older student. She was an older student who lost her support network that she'd had for so long and developed for so long in her career in the healthcare field. She had family responsibilities, so it wasn't just herself and her schoolwork that she had to think about. She had to think about how to balance everything else that was going on in her life and how to deal with things that would pop up randomly from time to time. Her travel time to school took a lot out of her physically, emotionally. It was a long time to get back and forth. She was lacking in self-confidence, which was very anxiety producing for her because she had been so self-confident in her profession. And she was, as I said, leaving her employment and her support network. But she used her life experiences to help turn each one of these around. It took her time. She wasn't so intimidated by her professors as some of the others were due to the similarity in age, and she was able to advise her younger classmates to develop relationships with them and not to be afraid of them. She applied her professional strengths to help engage in class projects, for instance, student presentations. She quickly learned that her younger classmates were terrified to make presentations, but she was used to them from her work experience, and she was able to coach them. So she did eventually regain her self-confidence. She was persistent, and when we talked to her, she was ready to go on for a graduate degree, which was going to require additional travel time and additional time away from family. Now we'll hear about Melvin, who's studying in South Africa.
Yeah, so as you can see, we got really inspired with these interviews, and each one got more inspiring or equally inspiring to the one before. We wanted to make sure that we have a broad spectrum of locations from where our students came from, and Martha and I were fortunate enough to be Fulbright scholars in South Africa. And we were at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth, and through our colleagues there, we got connected with Melvin, whom you see here on the slide, Whom you don't see is his brother, Patience. We actually had the interview with Melvin and his brother. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you is from the interview with both of them. And as I give you their story, you can look at the slide and see some of the comments that are from the interview. So those of you who are familiar with South Africa know that during the years of apartheid, non-white individuals were required to live in townships in very disadvantaged situations, in particular both in their daily lives and in their education as well. And this went on for a very long time until 1994 when apartheid ended. So Melvin and his brother Patience grew up in a township, in a very large family with very little access to, again, to quality education. In one of the situations, Melvin tells us about what they didn't know about a library. So here's a quote from him. Well, you see it there, is a library is like something we never dreamt of. We never knew the first thing about a library. When we were still at the school, it was only after we came to college and university that's when we knew that, oh, there's something called the library. And in addition, he goes on to share, we didn't have a math or science teacher. We only had a math or science teacher for the first quarter of the year. Then the other remaining part of the year, we couldn't have a math teacher, so we had to study math and science on our own. So you can imagine, coming from an environment like this, what kind of experience it was for them as they entered higher education. In South Africa, many students start by going to college before university, which is similar to going to community college before going to a four-year school here. So they began in college, and then they succeeded, the two of them, and they were accepted to university, in particular Nelson Mandela University. One of their biggest barriers was that they didn't have enough money for both of them to attend at the same time. So they were very creative in solving this problem. And the brother told him, I was doing a one-year job in retail marketing, whereas Patience was studying. And by then, I could help him by buying food. I could help him by buying clothes. I could help him to buy stationery. I can say that he is the reason I'm at the university. As I was helping him with finances, he was helping me with finding a space for scholarship at school. So here we have the two brothers alternating attendance at university so the other one could go. We kept on motivating each other no matter the circumstances. We could always get to the dream. They were driven toward their dream of achieving a college education. And motivation is a big factor in this story. In spite of the fact that their mother was uneducated and poorly educated, they consistently referenced her as a huge motivator in their lives. In a quote from the interview, she always called us each and every day, motivating us, telling us to study, telling us to really work hard. She's really behind us. We are motivated almost every day because of her. And we can see the reason why she's motivating us. She believes in us. She's really saying that we, as brothers, are the ones to change the situation in the family. We are the ones to bring light into the family. We are the ones to motivate those young ones that are coming after us. And the motivating sources don't end with the mother. They also shared their motivation by the teachers at the university, referring to their teachers as family. They are like a family. You mustn't be afraid to go and talk to them. I would say that most of the lecturers, which is the term used for faculty in South Africa, are like parents to me. I can go to them whenever I've got a problem or whenever I'm facing a challenge in a subject or in a particular module. So their mother motivated them, the teachers motivated them, and they were motivated by student mentors, which was a program that the university provided. And they themselves became student mentors after succeeding. When they're giving advice to students, this quote is particularly meaningful. It begins with, believe. A student has to believe, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your background, regardless of race or culture, you can believe, you can make differences. And then talking to us as educators. Lecturers must put themselves in the shoes of the students. They must be able to teach the students not only academia, but also looking at the life of a student. They should be open, transparent, and approachable. And this is a quote that is particularly touching. If I can't approach you, I cannot talk to you. And if I can't talk to you, I will never understand you. And you'll never hear my story. I'll never be open to you. I'll never tell you my problem if you're not approachable. So they must be approachable. So Melvin and patients face a lot of challenges, as you see on this slide. Financial support was a huge one. They had limited emotional support outside of themselves, but between the two of them and from their parents, and then ultimately within the environment of their learning environment, they were able to get support. Their preparation for university study was abysmal, and they didn't even know how to begin to effectively have strategies to succeed. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and ask you, does this story, does Melvin's story and these challenges resonate with you? What kinds of students are you seeing? Are some of these situations similar? Perhaps some from Connie and Charles as well. Just let you ultimately ask questions when you're ready, but we want you to reflect and see how these challenges fit with your own experience.
While you're thinking that through, I think we'll move ahead because we're cognizant of the time constraints, and we have, I think, 20 minutes left. So please continue to think it through if you're with a group, perhaps think about it together. What we're going to look at now are the common challenges. The common challenges, as you've probably put together yourself by now, each of these students lacked a support network. Support networks that they had before they came to school. Connie most clearly had a professional support network where she had her career. Charles had a support network back in his high school town with his family and his friends. He was an active member of the football team and everything else going on in school. And Patience and Melvin were very involved with their family. They left that. They left that to go to school, and so they needed to do something to supplement it. Inaccurate expectations about college. I would say that was very true for Charles. As we saw, he arrived at Louisiana State with 2 scholarships, in fact, not just 1, but 2, and he expected he was going to continue to be a football hero and do just fine, and he got knocked off of that pedestal very quickly. And Patience and Melvin had been to a school in the township in Port Elizabeth, where we were, and we have sat in those township schools and can tell you that very often the students sit there with no teacher, with no materials. They're sitting in a classroom that often doesn't even have a desk. They're just sitting in chairs, very patiently waiting for someone to come in and teach them. So these two, they had long-term goals, but they had no idea what it was going to be like to go to college. As Sharon said earlier, they didn't even know what a library was until they got there. Fear of failure. All of these students had families who were putting a lot of faith, had a lot of faith in them, and were very proud of them. But along with that comes, oh my gosh, I'm going to be letting down my family if I don't succeed, and so that created a lot of anxiety. Financial concerns across the board. If it hadn't been for financial concerns, Patience and Melvin could have gone to school at the same time and been their own network system at school. Charles wouldn't have had to have dropped out. And then, of course, lack of self-confidence. This is something that they all had to overcome, and they did overcome it because they were such motivated and persistent students. How did they overcome their challenges? Well, first of all, they did identify a support network. Some did it intentionally. Some did it, like Charles, for instance, after he flunked out of school and had to find a way back in. He met with, well, the parents of the students he was coaching became his first support network because they said, hey, there's something here. This kid has something, and we're going to help him move ahead. As soon as he got back to school, he identified an advisor who then worked with him and became his very personal support person and gave him additional strategies. Each of these students developed trusted relationships with faculty members. This is really key because it has to be two ways. Faculty have to be open to it, and students have to feel confident enough to walk into that office and say, I really want to work with you. I want you to notice me. I'm struggling, but I need your help. And it goes both ways. You heard Melvin say that he felt the instructors the lecturers were like family to him. I don't know if they felt that way, but he needed to feel that way toward them so that he could tell them his story. They all communicated with faculty on a regular basis. They weren't the people who sat in the back row. They sat right up front. They made sure the faculty knew who they were, and they took advantage of their office hours, and they were always in there. They learned that actively engaging in the classroom was the way to really absorb what was going on, really learn the material. And each one of them created a toolbox of learning strategies. This either came from their advisors or from coursework. Connie took a course, I think it was called Thoughtful Inquiry, her first year, and that's where she learned strategies for studying that she said were totally new to her. She had never really learned that way before, and she applied them immediately and found that they worked for her. They treated school like a full-time job. This was clearly something that Connie did and that she shared with her younger classmates. She said, you know, don't just run into your class and then run out. Get to school early in the morning, go to your classes and stay there. Stay there, develop the relationships that you need to develop, become a part of the culture at the school, learn about the resources that are there, and then at the end of the day, leave and feel okay that you can go home, you can be with your families, you can do what you need to do outside of school. But treat it more, think about it like a full-time job. This was something new to a lot of the younger students. And they connected school to their long-term goals. You could see with Melvin and his brother really wanted to go to med school, but they had to put that off. So they were connecting, they were breaking it into parts. They were really analyzing the goal and saying, all right, first I need to go to college, then I need to get this certificate, then I need to do this, and down the road, I'm still going to make it to that medical degree. Connie did the same thing, as did Charles. We've looked at the students. We've talked about their challenges. We've talked about how they overcame their challenges. Now, what Sharon and I usually do is take a look at what kind of a theoretical framework makes sense in this context. What theories can help us pull this information together and help make sense out of it?
Yeah, so we've got three theories here. I'm going to talk about the first two, and then Martha will go into the third one. We're going to give a brief overview of each one and then connect them to the students that we've been sharing with you today. So, locus of control and attribution theory. I'm guessing for many of you this is not unfamiliar, although just to be sure, I'm going to give a brief summary of what this theory is about. And basically it boils down to belief, a belief system. Locus of control, we're familiar with either internal or external locus of control. So a person with an external locus of control looks to the outside for reasons to explain an outcome. And I'll give an academic example. A student takes the test, he gets the results back, and it's a poor grade. A student with an external locus of control would be attributing the poor grade to these kinds of things. Well, the test wasn't fair, the questions didn't come from the book, the lecturer never talked about, the teacher never talked about it. Those kinds of things that they would have no control over, blaming other situations. The person with the internal locus of control, or attributing things to the internal part of themselves, would say, like, for example, this is a terrible grade. I didn't do well because I really didn't study for this. Or I didn't go to that study group that I thought I should be going to, but I didn't go, so I probably could have done better had I gone to the study group. Again, attributing the results of the test to things that he or she could have done differently. So that's the locus of control example. And you will see that, for example, Charles' story had really an external locus of control at the beginning. Everything outside that was connecting to his ability to succeed. And the others, CONNIE and MELVIN, had more of an internal locus of control where they were looking at themselves as the reason why things weren't going correctly. But at least initially, Charles came around later, at least initially, he started out with an external locus of control. So let's look at self-efficacy. Again, this may be a familiar term, but I'm going to summarize it quickly for you. Self-efficacy is, again, a belief situation, but it's a belief in your ability to do a particular thing well or not so well. It's not generalized, it's not global. So again, with an academic example, some people have beliefs, self-efficacy beliefs, that they can do very well in mathematics and maybe not do so well in writing a research paper. So the belief for being successful at a task varies from the type of task, from one task to another. It's not all over everything. One of the things, there's been a lot of research on self-efficacy, and one of the things we know is that the different level of self-efficacy you have is connected to how successful you're likely to be on the task. So what we've learned from research is having an overly high or unrealistic high on unrealistic belief about your ability to do something is not likely to be borne out. In other words, you're not likely to achieve as high as you think you are. And the same is true with having an overly low self-efficacy. If you think that you're going to be very unlikely to succeed at something, you're probably not going to do very well. So we don't want to have overly high or overly low self-efficacy beliefs. What we want is to be as realistic in the middle as possible, as closely connected to the real situation in terms of your readiness or capacity to successfully complete something. Charles is another good example of this because, without a doubt, he had over-the-top high self-efficacy beliefs going into university. He was good at everything before, so he was going to be really great at everything in college, but it was unrealistic and way too high. So these are some examples of how research in these two areas of locus of control and self-efficacy can inform us. And we get principles from these two theories. And specifically, I've listed 7 of them here, and I'm just going to quickly reference some of them. In relation to these two theories, we know that if we help students become more aware of their strengths and the areas that are not so strong, they can develop more realistic self-efficacy beliefs, and then within that frame give them support. They're more likely to succeed. So that also has to do with helping them set realistic goals, the third principle there. The second one has to do with helping students realize that the outcome of their behavior is not due to luck or somebody else's behavior. It's due to themselves and the control that they can exert over themselves. And one way to keep motivated and moving through is to have this, to talk positively to yourself, to be realistic. And then as educators, instead of praising someone for a job, for a good result, to praise effort more than just what the outcome is, but to recognize what went into achieving that outcome. This will become reinforced again as Martha goes into the last theoretical framework, mindset. So let me go on and let Martha, you tell us about mindset.
You're probably familiar with mindset theory, which comes from psychologist Charles Dweck. What is mindset? And again, this is very much related to the two theories that Sharon just shared. But mindset is a set of beliefs about yourself, in this case, your abilities, your intelligence. And Dweck talks about a fixed versus a growth mindset. We wanted to hear what our students thought about these concepts. So the last question we asked them was, share your thoughts on the following statements. 1, your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. 2, you can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. 3, no matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit. And 4, you can always substantially change how intelligent you are. Now, you may be surprised by these responses, but we were very curious to hear what these students who have faced so many barriers had to say about this. Some of their answers include, you can change very much. It's like a plant, and as long as you're feeding it, it's going to grow. Another student said, so I disagree that intelligence is fixed. It is not fixed. It could just be the way that someone presents the material to you. Do these surprise you? Do you think there are characteristics of students who succeed? In one case, Charles, that you heard about, we found that he'd grown from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. So that would suggest that perhaps it's a developmental process. And how can we facilitate that? Let's take a look at the chart on the slide, and let's focus on the growth mindset column. These are divided into, I think it's 7 different areas, but in the growth mindset, you very much believe that your capabilities can grow through effort, that they're not set at birth, you're not, you shouldn't be defined by your IQ, that's not really going to predict your success, but that your capabilities can grow through your own effort. This goes back to what Sharon was saying about locus of control, about self-efficacy. Identify strengths and weaknesses and continuously striving for improvement. That's a characteristic of students with a growth mindset. That's how they tend to behave. They're not just looking at their weaknesses and saying, okay, I give up, what can I do? When they face a challenge, they welcome it as an opportunity to develop. We saw that with all of the students we've talked about. Effort. Effort is seen as necessary for growth and development. If you have a fixed mindset, you probably have a low effort syndrome, because you feel like if you're showing other people how hard you have to work at something, that it devalues you, and it's seen as proof that, well, you're really not very smart. That's a fixed mindset. We want to stay away from that if we can. How do growth mindset individuals respond to failure? They see it as a challenge, and interest in success increases, demonstrating a resilience. One of our students, Charles, went into his, this is an example of the response to failure, did not do well. He was in a philosophy course where he was having a lot of problems. He didn't do well in a paper. So he went into his instructor and he said, okay, listen, I know I didn't say it right in the paper, but this is what it is. And he's like, you know, you've got a great mind. And he allowed me to redo the paper again. So Charles wasn't afraid to go in and say, you know, I didn't do well, but I know the material. I know I can do better. Just help me figure out how to do it. And instructor gave him another chance. They're eager to utilize the feedback to improve, and they will often thrive in challenging situations, seeking them out. I think you would agree that all of our students that we've described today ended up thriving, although they didn't always start that way, but they didn't leave an uncomfortable environment. They were out of their comfort zone. They didn't leave it. They stayed there because they ended up thriving. What are some principles for practice that we can pull from this theoretical framework? Emphasize the power of effort. Again, this goes back to locus of control, as does avoid praising intelligence. That's something that Carol Dweck talks about a lot. When we praise effort rather than intelligence or native ability, we're saying to the individual, you're in control, you can make this happen, you can make it better. Identifying strengths and weaknesses. You can always find strengths. Start with a strength and show how a student's strength can help them with their weakness. Also, it gives the student some self-confidence. I remember years ago working with a colleague as we went through a student's dissertation, and I said, all right, when we share this with the student, we want to start with the strengths. So we want to go through this and find out what the strong areas were. And he looked at me quizzically and said, well, why don't we just start at the beginning and just go right through in sequential order? I said, because then you might be starting with their weakest points, and you don't want to start off that way. So identifying both strengths and weaknesses, but starting with the strengths would be a good principle for practice. Encourage risk-taking. A lot of our students, as we all know, have never written an essay. They've never done a research paper. We have to give them the encouragement and the support that it takes to take that huge risk. That is a risk because it's very public. Once you put something down on paper, it's a very public testimony to whether or not you think you can do it. And avoid protecting students from mistakes and challenges. We see a lot of evidence of colleagues who, with the best of intentions, try to protect their students from challenges and from mistakes. one incident that's been in the news lately happened in North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where the most well-intentioned person was telling students, often remedial students who weren't doing well, to go into these courses that really were not real courses because they could do well. And she thought that that was going to help them stay in school and help them do better, where in effect it really wasn't, it wasn't doing them any good at all, but well-intentioned. So we have to be really careful to avoid those mistakes.
So as we're nearing the end of today's session, I want to recap and look at some of these wonderful quotes that we've heard from the students. When you look at Charles's quote, you can see the importance that he placed on regaining his confidence and the fact that the significant faculty member was in his life and helped him to do that after experiencing such difficulty and such horrible failure. And when we look at Connie's quote, she's telling us as educators that we need to be aware of our students' expectations, not just ours of them, but what are their expectations of us. And I think very often we neglect to ask, because what if they have expectations that we weren't prepared to meet? Or we just don't even think about it. So that's something that we learned from Connie's interview that we want to share with our colleagues, that it's important for it to be a two-way conversation. And then from Melvin, again, the importance of being connected to the whole student, the total student, listening to the whole story, being aware that what goes on outside of the classroom, outside of the campus environment, all of that affects the student's capacity to achieve, and what can we do when we get to know the student better and in a deeper way. Traditionally, often teachers, especially at university level, say that my job is to communicate the content. My role is not to understand what goes on in the student's life outside of my classroom. However, what we have been learning and have come to accept and believe so strongly is that it's very important to know the full life experience of the student, not just what goes on in the classroom. And then, of course, just finalizing it, we just want to share a framework that we use. It's in our publications that helps us continuously refine and enhance our own practice, so that we're looking at a model, a framework where we connect theory. We've been doing that, modeling that for you today, with research to support it, to inform our practice and come up with principles that we've just described some of them for you, all for the main purpose of maximizing learning environments for our students within an overriding area of critical reflection. So I think we're nearing the end of our time today, but I want to make one more request of you, actually, and that is that we are continuing this Student Voices project. We're collecting more student interviews, and we would like to hear from your students. So we hope that through Pearson you can communicate with us and recommend some students you may have that we would like that we could interview to include in this research project. And we can tell you individually you can contact us. I think our contact information is here. Yeah. Okay, so there are email addresses where you can send this information directly to us by email, and we can also tell you the process for how we contact the students, how we get their permission. The names we've used today are their real names. They've given us permission to use their interviews in their real names, and tell you a little bit more about how we proceed with the interviewing.
And then we'd also recommend that you go to our website, which is here on the final page too, because we do have 2 audio tapes of the students. I think Charles is on there, and Algernon perhaps.
We didn't speak about Algernon, but actually they're videos. You can see the students talking.
They're videotapes, and other colleagues have used these with their students and have told us how successful they've been. So we encourage you to go there, listen to them, and see for yourselves how motivational they can be.
Okay, so we're close to our ending time. I don't know, Steve, if you've got any questions to share, but we are here to answer any that you may have.
Great, thank you so much, Sharon and Martha. I do have a question for you that was submitted by Charlie Coley. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing your last name incorrectly. Charlie asks, are there any co-curricular programs or events that you recommend to encourage a growth mindset and foster support networks?
Oh, there are many. I don't know where to start, but we can email you. If you would send us your email address, there's so many I wouldn't know where to start. I guess a natural starting point would be mentoring programs, which are huge, but mentoring programs definitely are there to encourage that.
Yeah, and in fact, in one story, Melvin was talking about the role of the student mentoring program, and that he himself then became a student mentor. So it's great. Any other questions?
I was really struck by the chart where you were talking about growth mindset, and especially there were two kind of categories: response to failure and response to criticism. And I just kind of thought of my own experience of like that first time you encounter something that doesn't go right, a project that you've submitted that you get a bad grade on, and it totally knocks you off your foundation. Maybe you could just speak a little bit, we have a couple more minutes, about if that's innate, that ability to bounce back, or if that can be learned or encouraged, or how do you respond to that?
I don't think it's innate. I think it's natural for people to want others to appreciate their work and think that it's good, even though they might be very anxious about it. I think so much of it is up to the facilitator, the person who's giving the feedback. The way we give feedback, too often we don't think about it like my colleague. We just think, all right, we're going to start on page 1, and we're going to go through and we're going to critique paragraph by paragraph what the student has done, if we're talking about writing, for instance. I am a strong believer that you can always find something good about a work, whether it's a test, whether it's a paper. Find something that's good, and don't overdo it, but just show the student where they really did do an excellent job. And if they could just put forth the effort in the rest of the paper, and then give them some tips and tell them that you're there for support, don't judge them, give them a chance to redo it. Say, perhaps this wasn't your best effort, but let me give you a few tips. You did this really well. Come on back to me next week and show me what you can do.
So
more constructive criticism than outright criticism.
Yeah. And I'll add a communication strategy that may be useful here, something called the sandwich technique, where the first thing you say to the individual is positive. It's the outside piece of bread on the sandwich. So I can see that you really worked hard on this. And then the inside part of the sandwich is there were some parts that could really be improved upon, and then be specific about it. And then end with the rest of the sandwich at the end is, and I'm confident that when you put in more time on this, you're going to have an outstanding product. So again, using that metaphor of the sandwich helps you remember to keep those three parts with your communication.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time and your very informative presentation. I really personally got a lot out of it. I really know I speak on behalf of all the attendees that we really appreciated your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. We are getting close to our cutoff time. If there's no further questions, I think we should wrap up. You should know that we have recorded this presentation, and it'll be available on our Pedagogy and Practice website probably within a day or two. You will get an email notifying you when it is available and the link on how to get there. And of course, we'll have both Sharon and Martha's information there as well. If you wanted to contact them directly, I'm sure they would love that.
We would. Hope to hear from you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and I hope you can join us for another webinar later in the fall semester. Thank you so much.
Bye.